Hello, and welcome to Story Behind the Story. I'm your host, Reese Rand, author of sexy, emotional romantic fiction featuring lots of family drama, surprising secrets, and a cast of complicated, sometimes messy characters. And this is where romance readers and authors connect. And today I am very excited that our guest for today is the incomparable Donna Hill. So we're going to be talking to her today. So if you have your questions for her, by all means, don't forget that this is an interactive show. So you can pop your questions about the book or her career or whatever you'd like to ask us into the chat box. And we will address them as we have an opportunity during the show. So if not right away, we'll try to get double back to it. But we're always excited to talk to you and hear what you have to say. So by all means, don't neglect to share your thoughts or comments as we're talking. And before we get into today's show, just a reminder that if you are new here, by all means, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you'll know when future shows are up and posted. The next show will be on in 2 weeks on May 5th, and I will be with Angela Anderson, super reader and reviewer of Angela Anderson's Literary Tea. And so she's going to be joining me, and maybe we'll have a few other readers as well. And we'll be chatting about some of our favorite reads from this year, and you can maybe share some of yours as well. I love hearing about new books and discovering new authors. So if you do too, be sure to join us in 2 weeks on May the 5th. So, to our guest today. Oh, and one more thing. I always forget to mention the Brown Book series with Shay Baby. So if you look down near the bottom of my page, I have her as my first listed recommended website or YouTube channel. And so she talks to lots of authors. As a matter of fact, tonight she's talking to Lori Foster, or she did earlier. She was talking to Lori Foster. So by all means, make sure if you haven't checked her out before you check out Shay Baby's Brown Book series. And again, the link, you'll find it at the bottom of my page. It's the very first recommendation. So about our guest today, we're going to be talking to Donna Hill. And so I am very excited to talk to her, and you probably are too. So I'm going to go ahead and bring her on. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I was going to say Miss Hill, but I don't want to get in trouble again. So
You've been through that already.
Yeah. See, that's exactly the face that I imagined when you were like, ma'am. So I love to have my guests introduce themselves. And tell us what they want us to know about them. So tell, for anybody who might not be familiar with you already, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you write?
Ooh, that's a twist on intros. Let's see. Okay, so I'll try to make it short because if I was to tell it all, it spans 31 years. So this is my 31st year as a published writer. I was first published in short stories in like 1987. My first book was published in 1990. I've been published ever since. I've been sort of like a multitasker type of writer. So I've always written and worked at the same time. Currently, I'm an assistant professor at Medgar Evers College in New York. I love writing. I love teaching. I have 3 kids. They're not kids, but they act like kids. They're grown. They don't act grown. Everybody's over the age of consent, but they don't act like it. I have 4 grandkids. My oldest grandson will be 26 Um,
Oh wow.
yes, and my baby grandson will be 10. Yeah, he'll be 10 on his birthday. So and then I have one beautiful princess granddaughter. So everybody else is boys, 3 boys and 1 girl. Um, yeah, so I've always lived in Brooklyn. My family is from Brooklyn, but everybody migrated to New Jersey. They have been trying desperately to get me to move out
I
here.
knew you were gonna say that. That's how it always is with family.
And I'm just like, this holding all of my fingernails to Brooklyn until I'm just ready to finally settle. So I'm actually out in New Jersey right now. I'm with my sister. So I have my 2 vaccinations. So I feel a little better about moving around in the world. So I'm out here hanging out with my sister and my brother and my niece for like the past week. I've been here for a week already.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's cool. That's
Which
me.
vaccine did you go with?
I
I'm getting,
got
I
I
have
got Moderna.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I get
got the
my second
Moderna.
one pretty soon next week. I get my second one. So
Oh yeah, yeah. So I've been fully vaccinated for about 3 weeks now.
nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you
So
have any reactions to your?
um the first one, no. I mean, it was just like the ache in the arm that you get. The second one, I was like, I don't feel so good. Like, what is wrong? Like, I was tired. Well, what it was, I had like a low-grade fever. So it was making me tired and achy. So, I took a couple of Tylenol. That lasted off and on for a couple of days. And then after that, I was fine. So I didn't have any major reaction.
That's good. That is good to hear because I
Yeah.
know who've had it like really like knocked them out. So
Yeah.
Angela said the same thing. We have a few guests. Angela said the same thing. I said the face when I was like, she's like, no. And Mama Tony says, hello, Donna. As does
Hi,
as Rom-Com Diva also says hello.
Tony. Hi.
And she loves your books. So,
Thank
and
you.
yes, Lisa, I said the same thing. Wow, 31 years. Because we've celebrated a few amazing authors like around like the 25-year mark, but you've been hanging around for longer.
I know, right?
Yes.
And just imagine I'm only 35, just so I've been at it for a
I
long,
know. That's the amazing part about it. And Jennifer
straight
says
from the cradle.
as well. And we're glad to have you here too, watching the live stream with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow. So that is such an amazing career. So how did you get started writing fiction, and when did you know you wanted to be a fiction writer?
Wow, let's see. Second part of the question first. I don't know if I knew at a certain point that I wanted to be a fiction writer, because I never really understood the whole publishing thing, whatever that machine was. I knew that for as long as I can remember, I was always writing something. I was scribbling on stuff. I was basically like take dictation when I'm talking to people on the telephone. I'm writing down little snippets of things they say on pieces of paper. When I got to grammar school, and my friends in school, somehow or the other, I don't even know how it started happening, but I used to write love letters for them. To give to their boyfriends. And so the love letters were like song titles, like all strung together, like, to make a story. And this is what I would give to them, and so they pay me in candy and, stuff like that.
I was gonna say, was this a paid service?
Yeah, so that was basically it. So I would get candy, whatever.
And you said
When
I did not see one of your books is a song title. I can't remember which one it was. It looked like one of them. The title was like, I was like, that's a song title.
Yeah, probably. Oh, if I could, I know it's a song title. Yeah, so that's one of them.
So you've been doing that since way back.
Yeah. So, and when I got to be like, preteen teenager, I started writing a lot of poetry. And because teenagers We are always struggling. Got some saga or something going on.
Yeah.
So I wrote a lot of poetry. I wrote a lot about the Vietnam War, things like that. So I write those types of poetry and then kind of like let it go. And, growing up during that time period, there were not writers and mentors that looked like me or that I knew or had access to. So it never occurred to me that this was something that you could do, as a career or, even as a real hobby. Um, and so I kind of put it to the side and, I worked in accounting, which I hate numbers. I don't know how I wound up there. I worked in accounting. I worked at ABC Television for a while. I worked at the Brooklyn Public Library, the Queensborough Public Library. I did, public relations and things like that. And, like I wrote a lot then. But even prior to that, when I first started writing my first book, I was working at an architectural company, and the architectural offices had a interior design place, space within the offices. And so by then I had submitted my first short story to the Confession magazines. And that was like in 1987. And the editor, Nathasia Brooks Harris, when I sent it in, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, just writing this story and I'm sending it. And she sent it back to me. And I was like, okay, well, that's so much for that. Then across the top, it said, this is not a rejection. And I was like, oh my God. So she basically told me, dummy, confession magazines are supposed to be in first person. Like, oh, okay. So she told me she wanted me to rewrite the story in first person, which I did. And it was published in Black Romance magazine in 1987. So that was like my very first published piece of fiction. I had written several articles prior to that for like different small magazines and newspapers and things like that. And so I was writing these short stories. And she told me one day, she said, your stories are getting to be too long for publication. And she said, you're really getting good at this. You should think about writing a book. But my story had gone from like 10 pages to 15 pages. So I was like, a book, that is not. So I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, just think about it in parts. And, don't think about, oh my God, I have to write, 300 pages.
Right.
And so, yeah, exactly. So at that time, that's when I was working at the architectural firm. And I started crafting this story about an architect and an interior designer. And so I put together, the first four or five chapters or whatever. And she said, okay, well, Nathasia again, she said, there's a writers conference coming up. You should submit your work so that it can be seen. And I was like, okay, so I submitted it. And I got to meet with the editor. And because they, when you go to these conferences, the editors usually, at least they did at one point, they read your work in advance so that by the time you got to them, if you had an appointment or whatever, they knew who you were, what your work was, so they can talk to you. So I'm having this conversation with this woman who will remain nameless. But she said, it's a good story. You might want to soften up your heroine a little bit. And then she asked me, did my characters have to be Black? I was like, what?
Wow. So many people who've had that question in the past, I'm seeing. Wow.
I'm just like, yeah. So she said, well, I'm not trying to tell you to change or anything, but if you do, I'd be happy to look at your manuscript again. So basically, she was telling me, so long as my character was Black, she wasn't interested in my book.
Yeah.
So I was all, I was like, wow. So that's the end of my, fledgling career as a novelist. And So then I kept looking, and I found Crown Publishers, and I called and I pitched my story over the phone, because back then you could do stuff like that. And the editor said, "Oh, it sounds like something we'd really be interested in. It's like a great story. Send it to us." Da, da, da. I sent it in. Few weeks later, I get back a little memo pad note saying this does not meet our needs. So I called her back, and I said, "Well, I'm a new writer. How can I know how to be better if you won't tell me what's wrong with the product?"
Nice.
And so the editor said, "Well, I have to be honest with you. If we're going to publish any Black romances, they have to be better than anything else that's out here." I was like, wow. So I was just, at a total loss at that point. I just figured, I'll just keep writing articles for newspapers and call it a day. But then I ran across an ad in Writer's Digest magazine, and it was an ad for Odyssey Books. And Odyssey Books was a small, independent, Black-owned publishing company that was looking for Black romances written by Black peoples with Black characters. And I was like, well, that's right up my alley.
Yes.
And I submitted my manuscript, and I got a letter back from the publisher, Letitia Peoples, who told me they want to publish my book. So, of course, I'm elated, but she says, send in the rest of the manuscript. But I don't have the rest of the manuscript because I never wrote it, because everybody said they didn't want it. So, so I go into fiction story mode, and I write her this letter. I'm not satisfied with the end so much, and I want to do some different things with the characters. And as soon as I finish, I'm going to send it to you. So now I'm working like a crazy person, like every day. That's when I was traveling by train, and I would go on the train. I have my notebook. I write for an hour. It took me an hour to get to Manhattan from Brooklyn. I come home. I write for another hour. So that's 2 hours worth of writing that I would get in. My kids were little. I come home when they come to go to bed. I would sit down with my Selectric typewriter.
Wow.
With carbon paper and type my story every night until it was finished. And I sent it off. They published it. And that was Rooms of the Heart. And Rooms of the Heart basically launched Odyssey Books. It was their first contemporary novel.
Wow.
And I've been published like ever since. That's how it
Oh my gosh. Wow. That is, I love all of that. Just how you were persistent, and how you, called them to say, hey, you rejected this. Well, tell me what's wrong with it. Just lots of great nuggets. And then some of the things that we continue to see, people being asked about, their stories, that the characters have to be Black. And that's not just in books and film too.
Yeah.
You hear that sometimes. And we also had Lisa talk about how she hates that people ask that question. Do your characters have to be Black? Yeah. So how about that? So, wow. So how many books have you had published to date?
Oh, geez. I think somebody asked me that not too long ago. I went back and counted. I think it's like, I have over 100 titles published.
Wow.
And I think it's like maybe 80, 90 standalone books. And then, there's a whole slew of short stories that are in novellas in these anthologies. So I have, oh, thank you very much, Tony. I see you with your comment, right? About showing my age. I told y'all from the beginning that I'm only 35 and I started very early.
That's your story and you sticking to it.
That's right. And how my kids got so old is a mystery.
I looked on your website and I looked in your autobiography, because your biography is not on your website. It's but it was on your Amazon page. And I'm like looking for like a number, and I couldn't find it. I'm like, okay, so she's just going to tell us how many books that she's had published to date, approximately. And those books you have published, are not just in one genre. You have chick-lit, women's fiction, erotica, mystery, short stories. You've had a little bit of everything. So is there a preference that you have, or do you just really like being able to sample a little bit of everything?
Um, I'd like to sample different things. So I guess that's a good way of looking at it. I do like to sample different things. I mean, my I guess quasi training, came under the romance umbrella. Tony has 88. Okay, 88. Tony's funny. So it's I don't know. What was we saying? She threw me off. What?
All the different
Oh, the
genres
different genres.
that
Yeah.
you write
Um,
in. Yeah. I mean, because
I
like
don't know.
a
I
lot of
don't.
folks, like Miss Bev, we all know her for her historical, but she has some contemporary too. And some of
Right.
folks that just do contemporary or whatever. You're in a little bit everything. So like
Yeah.
the majority, the body of your work, what is mostly romance, or you have mostly women's fiction, or what do you love doing the most? Like if you had to pick just one, what would you be doing? If you
I
had to stick with one.
probably women's fiction. And only because it allows me to be more expansive in terms of storyline and what my characters are able to do. They
Yes.
aren't as much confined to, the guidelines of what a romance is.
Right.
But as now I remember what I was trying to say. See, I told you I'm old, but I'm young, and I
You're
just forget
35
that.
though.
Yes, exactly. But with because I've written romances for so long, there's always a romantic element in my stories, even if it's erotica, or even if there's a mystery, or even if it's women's fiction, because romance is very specific in terms of it's these two people, they meet, they have their problems, they fall in love, blah, 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 and they walk off into the sunset at the end. You can have every genre is centered on some sort of relationship, whether it is adversarial or just the opposite, but they're built on relationships, the connections between people. And so that skill set from understanding and having to understand people and understand how people connect and disconnect helps me in other areas that I write in. And so I think that knowing that and understanding that has allowed me to move out of strictly romance and do other types of writing. And still be able to take my readers with me, because even though they're going to read, A House Divided, for example, which is women's fiction, but it has a romantic element to it. If they read The Other Sister, if they read, An Ordinary Woman, if they read Wicked Ways, all of my, women's fiction work still is one of the centerpieces is the relationship, and that comes from years of writing romance. But romance is a little bit more constraining for me. Even though I
No,
write a
that
lot.
definitely makes a lot of sense to me, because I definitely feel like, because of the fact that before I started like writing, uh, um, to try to get published, I was really into chick-lit at the time, and reading that a lot in like women's fiction. And so even though I'm writing romance, I feel like there's always an element of like women's fiction in my stories, because it's never just about that couple. Like if somebody
Yeah.
only wants to read romance, they only want to read about that couple, then I'm probably not the person they want to read, because for
Right.
me, it's always, I feel like, okay, it's always about so many other things in your life, family and your work and all that's always involved. And they, so far, my publishers have allowed me to have a little bit more leeway with that and to
Yeah.
bring all those other elements and stuff. But I definitely could understand why that would be the one that would give you the most freedom.
Yeah.
To be able to do what you want to do.
And
So,
then too, Reese, you want to write what you want to read.
right. Absolutely.
So that's part of it too. And so I read like so many different things and different authors, and so there's all of that influence. And then when I was coming up and starting my reading journey when I was younger, I spent all my time in the library. That's all I did was read.
Yeah.
And I read like all of the quote unquote classics, like Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre, and all of the Greek mythology. So I have that idea of the archetypes. And then the unrequited love, and the dark heroes. All of that stuff was sort of like my influences early on before I started reading, writing anything. And then I moved into mysteries, and I would read, like all of Agatha Christie's mysteries. I'm determined that I was going to find out who done it before I get to the end of the book. And so those types of influences, you don't really think about what you absorb sometimes, but it's always there. It's always been, a part of me. Yeah.
That is so true, because like the books that influenced me to want to become a storyteller, it wasn't until like maybe I was like 3 to 5 books into my career when I realized that those books showed up a little bit, in every story I write. They kind of influenced what I wrote. And then once I kind of realized that, then I just leaned into it. It's like, okay, I know these are the things I like. Oh, I like these unconventional heroines. I love stories that have all this family drama and stuff and secrets. And so I just leaned into that, going forward with the story. So I'm going to take a minute to read a few of the readers' comments. First, Read, Love, Listen says, "That's so amazing. I remember your books being one of the few Black romance books at the library."
Wow.
And we're going to come back to that one because that has a question in it. And Miss JB says, "I finally got to see Donna on live. Yay." And we're going to get to that question in a minute. Let me see. Okay. So now I will take this question. Lisa Bennett says, "Question for Donna. Now that you've had a long career in this industry, what is something that you would do differently as a seasoned writer in terms of crafting new work today?"
I have a computer now.
Instead of that's electric.
That's the first thing. I got a computer. It's in terms of crafting new work, I think my process is essentially still the same because it works for me. I always start with an idea that I may not do anything with for a while. And I sort of like let it simmer. And ideas come to me from all areas. It may be, a name, it may be, an idea, it might be something I see on the news. And once I kind of have an idea, I want to write a story about X, Y, and Z, then I kind of start sketching out that idea and form my synopsis for the story, my vision for what I want that story to be. And that becomes the foundation for the novel. That'll be what I wind up submitting to editors and publishers or whatever. So that process has not changed. I still work the same way. I'm a very linear writer, so I write from beginning to end. So many of my friends and other writers that I've listened to, they say, I just this scene came to me and I just sat down and I just wrote it. If I did that, I would go out of my mind because I would be like, okay, so where's it supposed to go? And so you have to do kind of like what works for you. So a lot of practices that I began early on have stayed with me because they've worked for me. I always work based from a synopsis. I never just sit down and say, oh, I'm going to write this novel and just sit down and start writing. I could not do that. You know, I have begun now probably over, in terms of new stuff, probably over the last couple of years or so. I started using Scrivener.
Mm-hmm. Love
And
Scrivener. Yeah.
that has been like extremely helpful
Yes.
in terms of organization and things like that, because I'm very disorganized. Very
Scrivener is
disorganized.
especially helpful if you're a person who does write out of order. Like I do something. And normally for me, when I write out of order, it's usually when I'm not actually writing that book. Like
Okay.
I'm writing some other book, and these story scenes start to come to me, or some little snippets of conversation. Then I'll start, keeping track of them either in Scrivener or Evernote or something like that. And then once I start writing, I'm usually writing pretty linear. But I said I was going to experiment with going out of order more if just like I'm stuck on a spot. But I do find for me that when I'm stuck, it's usually that I don't know the character or the scene well enough, and I need to go back and dig deeper and do a little bit of that. So
yeah.
Excellent. And then Jennifer Copeland has a question, and that is, what is your favorite book that you've written?
Oh gosh, that's always a hard question. I mean, I think at different points in your career, that's your favorite book. Unless it's just something you just kind of threw out there because your editor said, this book has to be in by May, and you just like, right. There's different phases that I've gone through, as a writer. I'm very proud of certain books that I've done. Like one of my favorites is Rhythms, and that was because
which one?
And it was very.
You're breaking up a little bit. I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. It was the book was Rhythms. That was my first hardcover. And I think that was important to me because it was a breakthrough book for me. It was one of the first big major contracts that I had. So that has its place.
And say the name one more time, because you were breaking up both times when you said it before.
Oh, Rhythms.
Oh, that's what I thought you said. Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah,
okay.
Rhythms. Awesome. And An Ordinary Woman. That was the very first time that I wrote the entire novel in present tense. So that was special for me. When I did Getting Hers, it was like my first major foray into like murder and mayhem. And it was a takeoff on an Alfred Hitchcock storyline. So that was that, and like right now, my newest book, Confessions in B Flat, is just like probably it is the culmination of everything that I've done over the years. So so different times, I fall in love with my stories and different characters and things like that. So.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, because it just right now this is your favorite one. Then you write that next one, and you're like, okay, now this is my favorite.
Yeah. Like ask my favorite child.
Yeah. So I want to, before we hop into talking about Confessions in B Flat, as a matter of fact. So the one last thing I was going to ask you about is that fact that you've had 3 books adapted into films. So can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like, or how it came to be?
It was during a time when BET bought the Arabesque line, and they wanted original programming for BET. And so you're welcome, Jennifer. And they started looking at their their backlist and, you know, what writers, you know, books they could adapt. And they picked 3 of mine. They actually picked 4, but they said they couldn't do that because it would have been like totally unbalanced. So they did 3. I was all excited. And, you know, you got to be careful what you wish for. That's all I got to say. The adaptation of the books pretty much didn't have too much to do with the books themselves. And a lot of that had to do with, you know, what BT was looking for at that time, because they wanted their Friday night, and they were known as, you know, music videos for young folks. And so how can we get our young people to watch us on a Friday night? Well, we'll have car chases and we'll have, you know, drug deals and all sorts of stuff. So, you know, our lovely heroes and heroines, you know, turned into these other people.
Yeah.
My first one that they did, Intimate Betrayal, I remember they sent me the script. I'm all excited. I got my like first script and I read it. So I'm reading the script. And so I'm reading. I was like, her brother? She don't have no brother.
Like, this is not my book. This is somebody else's book.
I read a few more pages. I'm like, he's dead. I was like, what? So it was like a completely different book. It was, I mean, now I can look back and I can say, okay, well, I got, you know, 3 books, you know, made into movies for television. You know, they still come on periodically, you know, so that's all good. But what they did to us during that time was we had to get an attorney. I'll put it that way. And a lot of that had to do with they didn't want to pay us like at all. And that was because they felt they already owned the product. And so we're just doing what we're doing. There was no, what do they call it? There was no long arm of negotiation. They didn't have anybody to negotiate with because it was their stuff. And so they didn't want to have to pay us. They wanted to change the names of the characters. They wanted to do all kinds of stuff. So like, why are you bothering?
Wow.
So it was a mess. And that was back in the days of Blockbuster. So you know how long ago this was. So
yes, I do.
They didn't want to pay us when the movies went to Blockbuster either. It was just like, you're just not gonna pay us, period.
Wow.
So, you know, so what I learned from that, obviously, is that you have to really pay more attention to your contract. But, you know, back then, you know, they weren't making movies out of, you know, Black romance books. So you get a contract, you're happy, they throw you a few $1,000s and, you know, you go pay a bill. And you're good with that. And, you know, all of a sudden here come these people saying, you know, we want to make these movies. So they made 10. And then they stopped. There was a lot of, you know, backdoor, whatever was going on. And they ultimately stopped. But I have my 3. And, you know, one of them was like really good. Masquerade, I totally enjoyed. They did a really, really good job with Masquerade. I was upset with A Private Affair because Quentin Parker, he was like my personal hero, my person. And they just did something else with him. So I was just like, whatever. So that's my story.
Yeah, and we see now, you know, more and more of that. Films and filmmakers and TV networks are mining romance novels for content. So let's hope that it's a lot more fair now.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something to look into, like, you know, and that happens across a lot of creative industries. I still think all the time about, you know, what's happened to New Edition or what happened to TLC when they were with Pebbles, you know, that kind of stuff. About artists not being fairly compensated. But that works all something, lots of things to think about, lots of things to think about. So let's jump into talking about Confessions in B flat. So, okay, first of all, I have to ask. So when I went on the first things, when I went first saw the cover and I went on to Amazon, your author picture was next to that book cover, and it looks so much. It favors you so much. So that drawing that's on the book cover were you the inspiration for that character?
Nope.
Because
My
when you
published,
put them together,
no.
they remind me so much of each other.
I know it's crazy. But my publisher, we have like a great person, and Bree Archer, and they sent this cover to me, and I was like, oh my God, this cover. And that really happens. You know, like we get our covers, it's like, okay, yeah. What you gonna do?
I've definitely had some of those, but I've been on a good streak for a while. So let's just hope that continues.
The streak
But
continues, right?
I definitely have had some where I'm like, So I totally
Yeah,
get it. I totally get that.
yeah,
You don't always have control. We don't have, depends on the situation how much control you have, and a lot of times you don't have any or not
yeah.
enough, and it can be a very disappointing, you know, experience. So, but Confessions in B Flat is set in 1963. So, what inspired you to write a love story set in the civil rights era?
You know, like again, like you know, we were talking earlier about process, and the story came to me in pieces, probably over about a 10-15 year period. Um, and the first part of the story was only the title. It was B flat. That's all I knew. And you know, this guy I was seeing at the time, he was a musician. He was like, B flat. You know, that's like, why would you use that as a, you know, because it's like flat note. And I said, you know, I don't know. You know, I'm thinking, you know, maybe a story about, you know, a community people come together in this apartment B, you know, they chop it up about what's happening, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, you sure you want to call it B flat? And I was like, yeah, you know. And I put it in the back of my head and, you know, just kind of stored it there. And when I went to grad school for my MFA, the project that I worked on was about this family who had come from the South, had come from Mississippi, segregated Mississippi, to Brooklyn, and settled, and you know, raised their daughter, and you know, all these things. So that was my graduate project. So that kind of sat, and you know, I tried to, you know, get it published, and it was like, you know, the language is beautiful, but we don't know what to do with this story. Okay, fine. And then, you know, I started thinking, you know, going through like my little idea file, and one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to sort of do a spin on the Romeo and Juliet trope of, you know, two, you know, ill-fated lovers separated by something, but I knew I didn't want it to be family. And, you know, at the time that I started, the idea started coming together, you know, I was totally into, you know, politics and, you know, what's happening in the world. And I said, wow, you know, maybe it's their politics that separate them. And even though I'm only 35, you know, we're going to do some time travel here. I grew up during the 60s. So a lot of that, you know, just like our other influences, a lot of that, you know, it shaped the person that I was. Where I grew up and what was happening during that time period was so influential to me as an individual, my whole growing. And the music, the you know, the uprisings, you know, the war, and you know, all sorts of stuff. So I was living through all of that, and you know, it was such an important part of my life, and it just was sort of organic, you know, the way that all of those pieces started to come together. And I said, I want to write a story about two people who have different political ideologies during the civil rights era, which is, the 60s. And I knew that I needed to start the book at a specific igniting moment in history. And so I started in 1960, the same day Birmingham bombing, right, of the church. And so once I decided the frame that I was going to use, because I'm not going to do the entire 60s, it's like, how many years do I want to cover? And I knew I wanted to start in 63, and I'd probably stop somewhere about 67, 68, because I wanted to have certain elements in it. And so once I decided that that was my frame, this is my time period, this is the conflict that I'm going to use, then I began, sort of backtracking, like, who are these people? And I knew that I wanted, especially during that time, that, Malcolm and Martin were, our icons. And so it would have been easy for me to make Anita a follower of Martin, and Jason a follower of Malcolm. And I wanted to twist that. So I have them in reverse. And so it is their
I like
ideology.
that too. I noticed that, and I like that fact that Anita is the one who's the follower of Malcolm. So yeah, that was very clever. I like that.
Yeah. So, and so, that's kind of like how it came together. And, I started doing, the yearly research, major events that were happening, 63, 64, 65, on and on. And I, who I was going to include and who I wasn't going to include, and all of the background, that went with that. And that's kind of like how it came together. And there's pieces, of my graduate work that is in Confessions in B flat. The families are sort of composites of the family that I used in Leon, one of the characters that comes back into Anita's life, was in my my graduate thesis. So some of the pieces were there. And, it was just a matter of, trying to sort of thread the needle through all of these different pieces and put it together. And it became, Confessions in B flat.
You mentioned Malcolm and Martin, and so when did you know, when you developed the story, that you were going to incorporate real life people? And what kind of challenges did that create for you?
Well, I knew that I could not make them say things that they didn't say. So I don't have Martin or Malcolm actually having real live conversations with anybody. I think, Martin says something about, Brother Malcolm and I both want the same thing. That's something he would have said. In terms of, Malcolm and what he says, some of his actual speeches are in the novel. And so when I looked at, the things historically, especially, the Black activists during that time, I had to figure out, who was around, who was part of it, and some earlier history that I looked at when I was, working on another project. Pascal's restaurant in Atlanta is a real place. And it's a real place where Martin and his group of followers came often. And, I found photographs and things like that. The research that I did about the two brothers who created the space. And then, just looking at the different presidents, what happened to them. Kennedy's assassination was mentioned. Johnson takes over, all of these different elements. And so, but they're all backdrop to what's happening to Anita and Jason, because they still stay in the foreground of the story. And it doesn't, I don't think that the historical elements overwhelm the story, but basically sort of like add that texture to it. So that's kind of like how it was put together, and how I dealt with these real people, all of whom have passed. So there was that. I think one of the only characters that's mentioned that's still alive is Angela Davis. She's mentioned in the book, but she doesn't say anything. We just know that she's kind of like around. So that's kind of like how I dealt with it. Yeah.
You mentioned Pascal's being a real place. This mentioned in the book. Is B flat, the B flat lounge, is that based on any real place, and are there other real places mentioned in the story?
Yeah, so the other real places that I mentioned, so B flat is the competitor to a real place. And the real place is the Lenox Lounge. And the Lenox Lounge is like this famous, restaurant club in Harlem. And B flat, in my world, is down the street from Lenox Lounge.
Okay.
So it's sort of fashioned after it. So those are sort of like the two competing clubs in Harlem up on Lenox Avenue. So that's kind of like how that came about. Yeah, and the Apollo Theater, of course, is a real place. Abyssinian Baptist Church is a real place. The park that they go to is real. Everything, the elements in the story are real things. The only thing that's not really real is Jason's home. So I sort of like made that whole thing up. I don't know if that street even really existed in Atlanta, but that's the street we live on. But everything else, is taken from actual places. Yeah.
And in line with that, Jennifer asked, did you have to do a lot of research? I know that you said a lot of your graduate work influenced the story, and just were some of the additional research that you've done. You've talked about some of it, some of the places, some of the history, and what's happened. So what are some of the other things that you had to research for this story?
Like I had to research like simple things. Because you figure, 1963 and 64, like right now, here in New York, we use Metro cards, right? And it costs however much, $2.25 to get on the bus or the train. How much did it cost in 1963 to get on a train?
Mm-hmm.
So we had to know little things like that. And back then we used tokens. They're like about the size of a dime, that we would drop into the turnstile. So I had to know about that. There was a lot of graffiti, during that time. So, little thing, how much did things cost? How did people dress? What kind of cars did they have? So all of those little elements, and then even the basic stuff, because there's a lot of music woven throughout the story. So, a lot of the music is familiar to me because, like I grew up with that music, but it may be, that I wanted to say that, the Supremes sang, Baby Love, and I'm, singing about it or whatever, but they didn't sing it in 63. They may not have made that record until 68. Mm-hmm. So I had to, all of the songs that I selected to include, I had to go back and check the first release dates, things like that. There was a section when they went to the Apollo for the very first time. I'd done a lot of research about when that would have been. And I wanted them to go the night that Stevie Wonder made his debut. And I actually found the images and the video for that, when he did Fingertips for the first time. Wow. And, so I'm watching the video and I wanted to be able to, but we couldn't get the rights to include it. So we could only use the picture of the Apollo. Yeah. So, and Adam Clayton Powell's speech at Abyssinian Baptist Church, that's real. I had to get the transcripts, for that to be able to weave it into the story. Malcolm X's speech when he was being interviewed, that's real. And so I had to incorporate that into there as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So now you mentioned your heroine, Anita, who I just right away I was drawn to her. So tell readers a little bit more about her, what kind of person Anita is, and how you would sum her up.
Anita is very driven. She's very focused. And she is about achieving equality by any means necessary, even at the risk of her relationship. She felt that what she was doing was so very important. But at the flip side of it is that she's very creative. She's a poet. And so one of the ways that she expresses, what she's dealing with and how she feels through her poetry. And so she does her poetry sets at B flat at the lounge. And so I went back to
After her waitressing.
while she takes her apron off and goes up on stage.
Yeah. She negotiated more time when she had to work an extra shift.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
So I go back into my my early poetry days, and so all of her poetry is like original poetry for her.
I was going to ask you that. That was my next question about that. And when you said earlier that you wrote a lot of poetry, I was like, okay, she probably did write all of Anita's poetry. So that answers that question.
Yeah.
Now tell us a little bit more about Jason, who is a follower of Martin, and what makes them a good fit despite their differences.
Jason he's a solid Southern man who has essentially very traditional type values, which go completely against Anita, because Anita's on her own. She got her own place. She's doing her own thing. And even though he had his own place, in Atlanta, he goes to see his parents and he does all of these things. And so he was drawn to, Malcolm, because of, his own belief in peaceful resistance. And he too, both of them were searching for their place in society. Like, what can I do? We're always, we're listening to, all of the pundits now, talking about what can you do? If it's not you, then who? And so these two young people said, it's going to be me. And they were drawn to each other because they were opposite. They filled spaces in each other that the other one didn't have. Anita challenged Jason in ways he had never been challenged before. And he softens her in ways that she had not been softened before. And so in that, they become a perfect fit. And then they ultimately come to realize that, yeah, we may want to go about things differently, but we both want the same thing.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And when a reader comes and they read Confessions in B Flat, what is it that you hope that they take away from the story? That question always stumps me when somebody asks me that, because I'm like,
yeah, because you don't know if you think about it when you write it.
Here's the message that I want you to take away. So
yeah, I think that ultimately we can be different and still embrace those differences. I think that's ultimately, what the message is. Is that what I intended? I don't know if that's what I intended. Um, you know, People have told me that's what they got from it. So I'm telling you what they told me, that's what they got. Um, so but I think that it's about being accepting people for who they are, and embracing those differences, and that you can be different. You can agree to disagree, which is
Yeah,
what Anita and Jason tell each other all the time. We can agree to disagree. We don't have to be enemies on either side of the fence. We can just not agree with something, and find a way to find a middle ground, and still deal with each other. And that's a life lesson, like, for all of us, really. You know.
truly. So, tell us, what is it that we can expect from you next?
Oh wow. Okay. So I have a book from coming out of Harlequin, the Desire line. I think later this year. Should be out like in the
Oh,
fall.
that's exciting.
Yeah. Gave it
Oh,
some name that I wouldn't have given it. I don't know, strictly confidential or something like that. Anyway, that will be out, and it is the third book in my Grants of DC series. So it's the last brother in that series. So that'll be out this fall. And then, like, the major big project that I'm working on now is called I Am Aya, The Way Home. And it is a melding of history and contemporary fiction. So part of the story takes place in the mid 1800s. And my contemporary characters' ancestors were brought here on La Amistad, the slave ship, and the story kind of progresses from there. So it's told from a contemporary perspective, because my character has been forced to return home, um, and she begins to really um, want to know um, where she came from, and she finds out things that she could have never expected, and she finds a love interest along the way.
wow. Okay, so you said the Desire one comes out later this year. Do you know what month?
I think it's November,
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken. I believe it's in November.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so it's written and everything.
I was hoping we
It's
were gonna be in the
already,
same month. I have an October book. Okay, so yours is coming in November. All
yeah, I
right.
think it's in November. So it's in. I'm waiting to see what kind of cover they're going to give me. I have no idea why they gave me the title that they gave me. I'm just like, what does this have to do with
Well, you know,
anything that's
the,
in this?
the one thing is so funny that I can say is like, because part of the whole process is them having asking you for like title suggestions or whatever. And honestly, in all of my career, I like what 23 books. I think one book was actually named. Two books that were published by somebody else were actually named what I suggested that it be named. Normally, it's
What are you
not like
offering to ask me
I
for?
give them 20 suggestions. It's not going to be one of those. However, I will say this: that especially the last few, that their title has always like I didn't even if I didn't agree with it in the beginning, it ended up being perfect. And so,
Mhm.
like the one that was just nominated for a Vivian Engaging the Enemy, they came up with that title. A Reunion of Rivals, I actually fought that title. I did not want that title, but in the end, later on, I was like, damn, they were right. So,
Mm.
you
Well,
know,
we'll see. I
not
think it's
always,
for. I don't even
not
know what it's
always,
for.
because I got a couple I hate too. I'm not gonna lie. I have a
Yeah,
couple I
yeah.
hate too. But I definitely have a lot where, like, even if in the beginning I didn't really care for the name, it ended up working out. If it wasn't me to later change my mind, the readers were all like, "Oh, that's perfect." I'm like, "Okay, you say so." But yes, I
Yeah.
do have a couple that I hate though. So,
Yeah, I guess. So
so
they did this to me
hopefully it
twice.
all works out and it ends up working for you and working with
Yeah,
the. cover and stuff. I've been really happy with what they've been doing with covers. Exciting, not just my covers, but the covers they've been doing for the line period have been pretty amazing. So I'm super excited to see what your cover will look
We
like.
shall see. We shall
Yes, I'm
see.
looking forward to that. So
Yeah,
that's two very different projects. And so the other one that has both like contemporary and historical in it, when can we expect that one?
that won't be out until next year. Yeah,
Okay.
so I have like a year's worth of research to do, because it tracks 5 generations prior to my contemporary character. So it's like
Wow.
her
Oh yeah,
mother,
that's an
her
ambitious
grandmother, her
project.
great grandmother.
We know you got
Yeah,
this. That's an ambitious project.
I know. And I sit down to write it, and I'm thinking to myself, what were you thinking? Every time
Well, if anybody can handle it, you can after 31 years and over 100 titles. So
I
we
hope
have
so.
full confidence that you can do that. So, where can readers connect with you online?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I've been lurking more than anything else lately. But what is it? It's Facebook, Donna Hill Writer on Facebook. And then my fan page is Donna Hill Fans on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at Donna Hill. What else? I have an Instagram account. I'm still twiddling around with that. So it's Brooklyn Girl 737 on Instagram. So you can always find me. I'm around. And my website, donnaohill.com.
Okay, so it's that your website is donnaohill.com. I
Yeah.
have a link to your website in the description. So, I'm pretty sure it's in the description below, as well as a link to the book Confessions in B
Okay.
Flat. But if all the other social media sites, are they accessible from your website? If people go to the
Yes.
website,
Mm-hmm.
perfect.
Mm-hmm.
That's always the easiest way. So, for sure, no matter where you want to find her, if you're having a hard time finding her on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, you can go to the website, donnaohill.com, right? And connect to her from there. So, is there anything else you want to share with us? Because, I'm you the queen. You can whatever you want to do. So, is there anything else you want to share with us before we wrap up?
Just really um thanks to just readers, and book clubs, and folks like you. I mean, you're my colleague, and to for folks to like set aside time, and I there's no way that I could still be productive and writing and published, after all this time without reader support. It just wouldn't happen, because the publishers will drop you like a fly, like a bad habit if
Yeah.
if your books aren't selling. And so, I always have to give props to readers and my other writer friends that come out and support and stuff like that. So that's what I would leave you with, my undying thanks and gratitude for being there for me all of this time.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you again for joining us and for this chat and just sharing a little bit of everything. I love when writers come on and they're like super honest about, like, hey, this is how it was. This was great. This kind of sucked. This is what you should watch out for. I love that. And the readers love it too, because it's like we want to know all these little tidbits and behind the scenes kinds of things. And definitely, as like you said, a fellow writer, we can learn from these lessons, from these past lessons. So thank you for being so generous in sharing that with us. I don't have a copy of the book. I had my I was like make sure I open the thing and show the cover, but I love the cover. It's so pretty. You know what? I don't know. People can see it. You probably can't see it in this ring light, but I love the cover so
Yeah,
much.
there it is.
Black and white. It's my Kindle is black and white. So yeah, I love this cover so much. So if you haven't already gotten Confessions in B Flat, go out and get it. I know I have been sharing it everywhere because I had been on sale for the past week or whatever. And so as soon
Mhm.
as I saw that pop up in my email, I'm like, I'm about to tell everybody. So and it was perfect timing because we were going to be talking anyway. So
Yeah.
um, Jennifer said enjoyed the interview and thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank
So thank you for joining us because it
Yeah.
always makes it so much more interesting and exciting when the viewers participate and stuff. So thank y'all as always for being here and for joining us. Like I said, if you're new to the channel, by all means, be sure to subscribe and to hit like if you enjoyed our conversation. To thank Ms. Donna for joining us. So thank you and hit the thumbs up. And like I said, next time I'm going to be talking to some readers on May 5th. We're going to be talking about books like Confession and B Flat that we enjoyed and that we're recommending to other people. And
Thank you.
if you enjoy book discussions, check out Brown Book Series by Shay Baby. So thank y'all and have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, Reese.
Thank you. Same to you.